the James River. At 340 miles long, its breathtaking scenery and serene tranquility spans the entire Commonwealth of Virginia, all the way from the Blue Ridge Mountains to the Chesapeake Bay. Take in the sights, the nature, the smells, and dive in. Wait, nope. Don't do that. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Why, you may ask? Well, the James River has a problem. A poop problem. In fact, it's such a problem that there are actually signs along the river telling you to check how much E. coli is in the water. It's a useful idea, don't get me wrong, but wow, that's pretty f***ed. Clearly, we need those signs because in 2021 alone, 2 billion gallons of sewage ended up in that river. And it's all because of our best friends at the City of Richmond. See, Richmond is an old city, and by extension, its sewer system is also very old, dating all the way back to the 1800s. You know what else was created in the 1800s? Oh, I don't know. The first telegraph? The first typewriter? The first light bulb, even? Before this sewer system was built, people were writing with a quill and ink and sending letters on carrier pigeons to, like, the Louisiana Purchase or something. And, you know, call me an optimist or whatever, but I think a few things have improved since the 1800s. One of these things being sewage and stormwater treatment. First, let's break down the components you'll see in both the new and old way of building a sewer system. Here's your first component, the storm drain. These guys are basically massive, complicated funnels that take the stormwater from here and move it somewhere else. That somewhere else likely being a river, lake, or what have you. All the precipitation from a storm needs to go somewhere, and this takes that water where it needs to go. Your second component goes by many names, but for the sake of simplicity, let's call it a drain pipe. Much like the storm drain, this pipe takes all the sewage or wastewater and moves it somewhere else. Except this time, that somewhere else is to a treatment plant, where it gets thoroughly filtered and sanitized before being released back into a local waterway. Most stormwater and wastewater systems are like what you just heard me describe. They're called separate sanitary sewer systems. The two parts, one for stormwater and one for wastewater, are completely isolated. It doesn't matter if we're in the middle of a big rainstorm and droves of people are flushing stuff down the toilet at the same time. Nothing's going to get clogged up. Theoretically. By contrast, Richmond has what's called a combined sewer outflow system. Like the name suggests, instead of keeping the stormwater and the wastewater in their own contained systems, both the stormwater and wastewater flow through the same set of pipes. Let's say Richmond is just chock full of people with IBS and everyone starts having symptoms at the same time. The pipes get put to work. Then suddenly, a freak tropical storm parks itself over Broad Street. Those pipes will not be happy. In fact, they'll be so completely and utterly done trying to filter everything that they'll literally back up and start spilling out into the local waterway. Raw, untreated sewage gets unceremoniously dumped into the river because there just isn't enough capacity to process the stormwater and wastewater at the same time. Obviously, this is an exaggeration. I mean, I hope it is. But a much more toned down version of this scenario is more common than you'd think. You know, without the IBS. Back in the 1870s when Richmond built their sewer system, this kind of thing was totally normal. To be fair, we also thought that ingesting mercury to cure your cold was totally normal back then. So who's to say what a good idea was? In the year of our Lord, 2024, we've collectively seen the light as a society and recognized the separate sanitary sewer system as the superior option. So why hasn't Richmond just fixed their sewer already? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Rather, it's actually the $1.3 billion question, because that's how expensive it was initially projected to fix Richmond's lovely sewers. With something of such a massive magnitude, it's really easy to just keep kicking the can down the road, over and over again. I mean, I haven't paid my credit card bill since before the pandemic, so I get it. But it's not just the city itself that's been dragging its feet. The state and federal government are just as guilty of inaction, if not more. Congress passed the first piece of water pollution legislation way back in 1948 and called it the Federal Water Pollution Control Act. The law had 3 outcomes. First, it gave the Surgeon General and other federal, state, and local entities the ability to create sweeping programs for minimizing or completely eliminating water pollution in waterways that cross state lines. Second, it gave standard guidelines for improving both the sanitary condition of both surface and underground waters. Third, it gave the Federal Works Administrator the power to help out states, municipalities, and other interstate agencies build out treatment plants so that we're not just dumping straight sewage into the water. Pretty awesome, right? Well, you may have caught a real fun little exception in that law, rendering it completely useless for the James River. And as much as the James River makes me want to salute the flag of the Commonwealth, portrait of George Washington in hand, single tear running down my right cheek, our Grand River just doesn't cross the state border. So there goes that idea. Then, in 1972, with amendments in 1974, Congress passed the Clean Water Act, which is the one you've probably heard more about. Following this law, it became illegal for any person to pollute waterways from a point source, full stop. Well, unless you have a permit, and in that case, you can still pollute, just not as much. The Environmental Protection Agency set out a playbook of what are considered reasonable pollution standards based on what's available and economically achievable for every region of the country, and everyone in each region has to follow their respective rules. What are Virginia's rules, you may ask? Well, there are 2 different sets of regulations for our sewer systems, with one for each type of sewer I mentioned earlier. In the Virginia Municipal League's titillating document called Understanding Wastewater Regulation in Virginia, a separate sanitary sewer system has a whole page dedicated to summarizing the extensive regulations that apply to it, while a combined sewer system has a cool 1 paragraph that says, Combined sewer outflow permits 9 technology-based minimum controls and a long-term control plan that includes water quality impact considerations. Oh, so you can dump poop in the river, you just have to be honest about it. Nice. No, that's good. Like, that's so good, guys. And to be clear, Richmond isn't breaking any regulations from the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. Despite the condoms, sanitary pads, and raw sewage that Virginia Tech researchers found in the stomachs of the James River's catfish, the city's former Department of Public Utilities lead, Calvin Farr, has on the record stated they're in compliance because they somehow are. Ironically, Prince William County from up north poached him 3 years ago, so I guess we can expect some condoms in the Potomac River in the near future too. But don't get me wrong. Things have absolutely improved since the Clean Water Act was first introduced. The Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, literally caught on fire in 1969 from all the oil mixed in with it. Haven't heard of many on-fire rivers since then. But back when the Clean Water Act was passed, people were still driving around in cars without airbags, and high schoolers could go to officially designating smoking areas that were literally inside their school buildings. In fact, Richmond has done a few things over the years to fix up its sewer system. As of 2023, the city has already spent about $315 million since the late 80s. On top of that, only about a third of the city is now served by the combined sewer outflow system, with the rest of it being served by its modern counterpart. That being said, we're unfortunately just not there yet. This brings us to the most damning piece of evidence of how behind we are. On September 17, 2021, Richmond was hit with nearly 3 inches of rainfall within the span of a few hours. This wasn't just the deep puddles you usually get around here with the heavy rain. North Harrison Street was looking like the Mississippi that day. As you may have tragically guessed, this wasn't just stormwater in the streets. Normally, when Richmond's sewer system gets overwhelmed with wastewater and stormwater, it dumps it back into the James River. This time, there was so much rain that it caused the stormwater and wastewater to back up and fill the streets. A manhole cover was literally being pushed out of its hole from all the backup. Such a massive amount of rain in a short amount of time might be an anomaly now, but it's poised to only become more common as we experience the prolonged effects of climate change. Clearly, this is a shitty situation. And you know what? Virginia finally recognized it. Back in 2005, the state issued a consent special order to implement some recommended infrastructure improvements in Richmond. Over the next 15 years, the city chipped away at a few different initiatives, constructing a few large-scale projects to help clean up their sewers. New stormwater and wastewater retention tunnels, new outflow regulators, true sewer separation in 2 neighborhoods, and a wet weather UV disinfection facility. It really seemed like, for a while at least, that Virginia and Richmond got their act together and started to make some real, tangible improvements, ones on a financial timeline that worked. I wouldn't say that progress was particularly fast, but considering Richmond's budget, things were coming along. Then, the General Assembly turned up the heat. A lot. In 2020, they passed a law requiring any municipality east of Charlottesville whose sewer dumps into the James River to treat 99% of all discharges by 2035. What does that mean? Well, first, the only municipality that dumps specifically into the James River east of Charlottesville is Richmond, so this is purely a Richmond law. It basically made the Department of Environmental Quality's consent orders for Richmond to fix the sewers enforceable by law. It even laid out a clear timeline for planning and construction to make things as easy as possible. Good news! Things are finally moving forward and much faster than before. Except, where's Richmond gonna get all this money from? Funny you should ask. Did you notice what the 2020 law conveniently didn't include? Funding. The City of Richmond is now on the hook for a 2035 deadline and for finding the money to finish up decades of procrastination in what is now only 11 years. Like, if my landlord told me they were finally going to fix the leaky pipes in my hallway, but I had to pay to replace the pipes, carpet, drywall, and God knows what else to stop the leak, I'd be mad as hell. What kind of logic is that? Finally, we come to today. 4 years after the law went into effect, the ball's been rolling, but who knows if it's been moving fast enough. Richmond is currently capable of treating 91% of its sewer outflow. Certainly closer, but that final stretch is an expensive one at $1.3 billion, like I mentioned before. However, the city's Department of Public Utilities and the Department of Environmental Quality worked together to identify 4 projects that'll put the city at 99% treatment while cutting the price tag by more than half. It's still $600 million, undoubtedly better than before, but Richmond just doesn't have that kind of money to throw around. Richmond got $100 million from the state budget back in 2022, and was poised to get another $100 million in 2023, but it was completely axed, leaving the city high and dry. Well, very wet, actually. This year, Governor Youngkin proposed sending a paltry, by comparison, $50 million, putting everything financially behind schedule. Like, imagine if you got in a nasty car crash, and then State Farm rolls up on the side of the road with a fudgesicle, gives you a brisk pat on the back, and slides a $5 bill to your pocket to cover the damages. Can't even get a damn Subway sandwich with that, man. Beyond that, Richmond was able to secure between $40 and $50 million through the American Rescue Plan, but other than that, nothing. Frankly, it's just insulting. What happens if Richmond can't scrounge together the money? Oh, it's very simple, actually. See, the people who live in Richmond, the ones who pay utilities, they'll foot the bill. Isn't that cool? It's pretty funny because that could result in anywhere from 160% to 220% increase in monthly bills in a city where wastewater bills already take up the highest percentage of median income than anywhere else in Virginia. I just can't even begin to explain how cool that is. It's a great coincidence because do you know whose fault it isn't for the whole mess we're in? The people who pay utilities. We're just out here using the poop pipes because we have to. We didn't build them. If the state and federal government don't pony up, Richmond residents that are just trying to make ends meet will have to clean up the mess of decades and decades of short-term thinking. The reality is, this issue of aging or inadequate infrastructure is not unique to Richmond. It's an issue that we're facing everywhere in the United States. As of May 2023, there are about a whopping 700 combined sewer outflow systems around the country, including 2 other systems in Virginia. You know, it's gross when you walk past one pile of dog poop on the street, but what about 700 piles of dog poop? And there's a pretty significant chance that there are more of them because only about 90% of these systems are estimated to be verified by their respective state governments. On top of that, the kind of law that Virginia passed in 2020, called an unfunded mandate that requires some huge, expensive initiative without providing any funding to get it done, is all too common in the United States. The Clean Air Act mandates that states have to meet the federal government's national ambient air quality standards without giving them any money to do so. No Child Left Behind drew up nationwide standardized testing performance goals, and if a state's schools were falling behind expectations, the states and local governments had to foot the bill for improvements. Medicaid, the nationwide healthcare system for low-income and disabled citizens, is only partially funded by the federal government, and the states are left completely responsible for running the program itself. Theoretically, Congress shouldn't be able to pass these kinds of laws anymore as of 1995 because of the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act, or UMRA. But No Child Left Behind was passed 6 years after the UMRA, and that's just the federal government imposing mandates on the states. It may depend on the state, but in Virginia, you can tell our cities, towns, and counties what to do all day long without giving them a drop of money to follow the rules. All of this comes together to make a situation where the City of Richmond had this big, expensive problem on their hands that they knew had to be fixed at some point, but either didn't have or didn't properly set aside the resources to do so. Now, the General Assembly is actively punishing the city by forcing them to get everything done on an accelerated schedule without giving it the money it needs to get everything done. At the end of this pipeline lies the people who live in Richmond, who will be responsible for footing the bill if the state doesn't feel like paying up. Now, don't get me wrong. I get that there are some things that are left up to our states and local governments. It's just the way that our government is set up, and there's nothing wrong with that in itself. However, you can't deny the fact that every state and municipality is in a different financial position. Richmond just doesn't have the local tax base to fix all its problems like that, compared to somewhere like Loudoun County up north, who's home to the highest median household income in the entire country. The higher levels of government don't need to be in charge of everything. Not at all. But if our municipalities are allowed to struggle this much, maybe it's time they lent a hand. The crux of this issue, though, is unfortunately a symptom of the general lack of long-term thinking from many of our lawmakers, and I get it to a certain extent. As much as our elected officials are public servants, they need to appeal to the flashy part of our brains that likes fancy new things. Campaigning for some large-scale project that'll revolutionize our lives gets people's attention. Even better if that project can start and make some real progress while they're in office. Something like campaigning for road maintenance, while obviously important, just doesn't scratch that same itch. For whatever combination of reasons, we reward flashy, short-term thinking and ignore deep-seated, boring, but necessary efforts to stop problems before they even come up. Imagine if Texas were spending loads of money on maintaining and upgrading its electrical grid every year and its prolonged blackouts never happened. You get people asking why we're throwing so much money away if there's never been an issue. Conversely, if the power grid still went out despite all the spending, you get people asking why we're throwing such money away if the power is still going to go out anyways. After all, isn't there something better we could be spending that money on to make our lives better today? Richmond's combined sewer outflow system is really an unfortunate story. Beyond the blatantly negative environmental and health impacts of pouring raw sewage into the James River, the way our elected officials have handled these problems is a reflection of an attitude we can't afford to keep up anymore. Our legislators have to shift their focus away from squeezing as much short-term progress as they can in each term, and instead spend their time working on initiatives that make our lives better in the long run. And in turn, we need to reward those who campaign and deliver on those less flashy but absolutely vital things, and those who truly value solving a problem before it starts. Hell, why not extend delegates' terms to be longer than 2 years while we're at it, so they don't spend half their time campaigning while they're in office? We're better than this, and I know it. So the next time you see something broken in your city, something you know can be fixed, be the squeaky wheel and call for a change. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.